Joining us now, Jen Palmieri, former communications director for Hillary for America, former White House communications director and an MSNBC political analyst. NBC senior business correspondent Christine Romans is at the big board. And here with me in Atlanta, former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, an MSNBC political analyst and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, and NBC correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Okay, Christine, let's start with the economy because that is going to be key tonight. Poll after poll shows it's the number one issue for voters. What are some of the big things you'll be watching for tonight?
Well, you have this unique experience here where you have two men who each have a record that they can try to celebrate here tonight. And you'll be hearing from President Trump, I'm sure, that inflation was lower when he was president. When he ended office, it was 1.4%. But as you know, the unemployment rate jumped to 6.7% at the end of his term. And overall jobs added was a jobs loss because of the COVID crisis. The stock market, meantime, jumped 69% when Trump was in office. You'll hear him probably talk about how he thinks things were better in his administration. But compare that with Joe Biden. After you saw a spike up to 9% in inflation, it's back down to 3.3%. The jobless rate has remained very low for a historic amount of time. Jobs added 15 million out of the COVID crash into this booming economy that we're in now. And under him, the stock market is up 43%. In fact, I really want to zero in on this because you'll remember in a previous debate that Donald Trump said if America elected Joe Biden, you would see a stock market crash. Here is the stock market under Trump. Here is the stock market under Biden. Right here, this is COVID. Right here, this is that spike in inflation, which has since begun to ease. So those are where we stand there. Now, when you talk about their records, tariffs, big corporate and individual tax cuts, and lots of deregulation for Trump. Under Biden, he's really focused on kitchen table issues, Chris, like junk fees, like antitrust, keeping companies from getting too big and taking advantage of consumers. Big legislative achievements here under infrastructure, bipartisan there, the CHIPS Act, the big investments in the environment, and student loan forgiveness. I think another issue we're really going to be zeroing in on tonight is taxes, the coming tax fight. Here is what Donald Trump wants to do. Cut the corporate tax further. Wants to extend 2017 tax cuts that could cost up to $5 trillion added to the deficit, depending on who you ask, and ending taxes on tips. That helps low-wage workers. Joe Biden really zeroing in on what he calls tax fairness, keeping tax cuts for people who make less than $400,000 a year, but raising them on the super wealthy and corporations, and really trying to plug away at what they're trying to do in this administration to help people with the cost of housing. So I think you're going to have a lot of fodder here for voters, really, assuming things are there's good decorum tonight. Voters can get a lot of information tonight, Chris.
Good decorum. Okay, we'll come back to you more on that, Christine Romans, and see if that turned out to be. Jen Palmieri, let me go to you because you're plugged in to Biden world. We just saw him getting off Marine One and heading to Air Force One to make his way here. How's Team Biden feeling about tonight? What's their number one goal, do you think, tonight?
I think it's to make Donald Trump own the record that he has. You know, this is there's Trump amnesia. There is people have forgotten how bad the economy was, as Christine showed at the end of the Trump term and what Biden inherited. But also there's confusion about who owns the Trump abortion bans. That because a lot of those bans passed while Biden was in office. People aren't sure if he's responsible or if Trump is responsible. And then, of course, to have him own his inability to accept basic democratic outcomes like the result of the 2020 election and the outcome of a very fair trial in which he was convicted of a felony. And so I think that, you also want to get in what Biden has accomplished, particularly because there are some questions in the Democratic base about what he's done. But I would lose the thing that I think is most important is nailing the Trump record.
And on the Trump side, look what I just got. Almost 2 full pages of notes from Vaughn Hilliard about what he's hearing from Trump world. Give us the headlines, because what we keep hearing is He was born to debate. He doesn't have to prepare to debate. He lives his life, and that's his preparation for
I think that we will all be going back to the quote of the week that he's been preparing this his whole life, and he doesn't need to go away into a room for 2 days or a week. That is the line that we're going to be coming back tonight after we see how Donald Trump comes out over these 90 minutes. Look, Donald Trump has now a record that Joe Biden is going to be able to use, not only from the 4 years, 2017 to 2021, but also what came after. That includes the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And it was in that September 2020 debate when Joe Biden said that abortion rights, reproductive rights, were on the ballot. And it was just 4 days before that debate that Amy Coney Barrett was nominated by Donald Trump to be on the bench. And I think we have a bite from that debate 4 years ago about abortion rights. Take a listen.
The president also is opposed to Roe v. Wade. That's on the ballot as well in the court. And so that's also at stake right now. And so the election is already
You don't know it's
begun.
on the ballot. Why is it on the ballot?
Because
Why is it
you
on the
said
ballot? It's not on the ballot.
It's on the ballot in the court.
I don't think so.
Donald Trump went on to say that he didn't know how Amy Coney Barrett was going to rule on a Roe v. Wade, right? Ultimately, she did help overturn Dobbs. And this is where, for Donald Trump, ever since, he has said, you know, look, I support having exceptions in states. But ultimately, this is where you see Democrats say, at this point in time, you don't get to control this. Every ban in every state, regardless of how far it goes, you, Donald Trump, own it. And when you're talking about Donald Trump, he has struggled to answer other questions, like his position on abortion medication. And, you know, us in the press, we don't get many opportunities to actually get questions to Donald Trump. Back in April,
pretty close to zero.
Pretty close to zero. Back in April, he had told us that he would be releasing in 1 week a position on abortion medication. That was back in April. He hasn't answered that. He hasn't answered whether his Department of Justice would go and prosecute under the Comstock Act, which would potentially allow them to prosecute individuals for having abortion medication mailed to them. So those are a lot of the questions that Joe Biden could potentially bring that Donald Trump has not had to answer over the course of these 4 years.
What the voters bring, Claire, is a sense of unease, right? And I have to say, I think that number is really telling. 16% of those, obviously soft supporters, that's not the Donald Trump base, that's not the diehard Democrat, but there are 16% of voters who say they could watch tonight and change their minds. What does that tell us about the stakes?
Well, the stakes are huge because it's so close. So you know what happens when elections are close? Little stuff matters. Every little thing matters. We know that, frankly, the fact that 82% say they won't change their mind, that's a function of having two incumbents running. I mean, Trump's not an incumbent, although he'd tell you he is. But we've got two people who have been president. So everybody in the country knows who these people are. Now it's a matter of Joe Biden reminding people what Donald Trump failed to do. I mean, frankly, one of the most effective things he could do is go through the list of things where Trump says, I'm going to have that plan in 2 weeks. As you know, Vaughn, this is a classic tactic of his. He's done it on health care. He's done it on abortion policy. He says, well, I'm going to have something really good and wonderful in 2 weeks. And it never shows up. And that's the kind of thing that Trump is good at, not getting things done. So, you know, Biden's got a lot of territory where he can say something positive after he's attacked, but immediately pivot and put Donald Trump on defense. That's the secret to this debate. Get Donald Trump on defense, and he's going to behave badly.
The issues are incredibly important, and Vaughn knows this better than anybody. You go out and you talk to voters. They will tell you what's most important to them, but they will also talk about their discomfort with Donald Trump that has been there, frankly, from the beginning, that they think he's over the top, and that's probably the nicest thing. And the age thing, Jen, with the president, you can't change how old you are. You can affect how you present that. What can Joe Biden do tonight to suggest to people who are worried about it, I am not too old for this job. I am the person for this job?
So, yeah, this is every couple of months he needs to reaffirm to the American public that he's more than up for the job. You know, the State of the Union was a good moment for that back in March, and tonight will be another good moment to see that. You know, the age, every candidate has a vulnerability that never quite goes away, right? You just have to, you're constantly pushing against it. You're constantly addressing it. And I think that's the age issue for Biden. Could be worse. You know, people don't say, Donald Trump doesn't run around necessarily saying that Joe Biden's doing a bad job, right? The big concern that people have about him is his age. And if you're able to demonstrate that tonight, that he's more than up for the job, lean into his experience and wisdom. I mean, I really think that, you know, every moment of his life has been preparing him to be the right president at this time. All of the foreign policy experience he has, all the experience he has in Congress, a great record of accomplishment in Congress, including bipartisan wins. He's the right, you know, that his age gives him the experience and wisdom to be the right president now, and then just show that he has the, you know, the energy to do it. And tonight will probably be a good night for doing that, and then there'll have to be other moments along the campaign trail where he continues to show that.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.